Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt inside the ReliefFactor.com studio. So glad to have you with me on the first day of the Perry Mason impeachment. We all know how it's going to end. Every one of us. He will be acquitted. Second acquittal for Donald Trump. I'm not that interested in it. I'm doing the reading. I've cited you the key parts of the former president's brief on Twitter. I'm reading Brian Kalt's article again, going back for some footnotes that I missed. Apparently, some people talked about having an impeachment for Nixon. One of my arguments is the plain reading of the Constitution doesn't say former presidents. And some of the early state constitutions did allow for the impeachment of former presidents or former officials. And therefore, it wasn't included. I'm assuming that the framers were intimately familiar with all of the state constitutions in 1787. If they chose not to include impeachment of former officials, they meant not to include impeachment of former officials when other states had impeachment of former officials. And then this vast lack, I think the Kalt article is the only article. It's a 1991 article in, I think, the Michigan State Law Journal, maybe the Texas Journal of Law and Politics. And then Brian tells me that there are some footnotes on articles calling for the post-resignation impeachment of Richard Nixon, with which I've never, ever been familiar, so I'm looking for them. I've got his article up in front of me, but I can't find them, so I'll get to them later. But it's simply not persuasive. And you have to work yourself into a complete pretzel to get there. You have to be a law professor to get there. Although, look, Ed Markey... You got to remember, Ed Markey, Serious Con Law here. I'm with MSNBC's Katie Tur yesterday, cut number 5.
We don't have an historic constitutional option not to have this trial. The president incited a riot. The president was tweeting even as the rioters were inside of the Capitol. We don't have a choice. Otherwise, future presidents, future office holders will feel as though they can act with impunity. So we have to do it. But at the same time, we have the other urgent crises which are facing our country, and we have to move forward on them as well, beginning with the COVID relief package. And it is being constructed as we are speaking right now. The ideas are on the table. They are being compiled in a way in which we can move forward legislatively to deal with the economic and healthcare problems, crises, which we're living with right now. We don't have a choice. We have to do it all. It's our constitutional responsibility. It's 1933 right now from an economic perspective. It's 1918 from a healthcare perspective. It's 1868 from the perspective of a president inciting insurrection against our country. We do not have an opportunity to look away from any of these issues. We have to deal with them all, and we have to deal with them all as part of our constitutional responsibility as senators.
Now, did you notice he didn't cite anything in the Constitution? Did you notice that? Just blah, 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 blah. I've got a left wing I've got to worry about. And boy, it's 1933. No, it's not 1933. The unemployment isn't remotely like 1933. The country's bounce back is far advanced, not as far as we want. It's not 1918 with regards to health. The 1918 pandemic was just much more terrible. Thank God it's not 1918. This is bad enough as it is. That's just classic rhetoric, rhetorical excess. And, you know, the amount of hysteria on the left is not a good indication of what the Constitution says. Now, Professor Kalt comes to the conclusion that you can. I go with Judge Ludig. I go with Alan Dershowitz. I go with the plain meeting. As when Justice Breyer was in the studio and we had an argument about how one reads the Constitution, I reminded him of the farmer at the Massachusetts Ratification Convention who stood up and said, we have no lawyers in my town. We do not need them. I have read this for myself, and it makes sense to me. And that's what I do. I read the Constitution and any on-point Supreme Court precedent. I don't listen to Ed Markey. I've never listened to Ed Markey. No one should listen to Ed Markey. But honestly, there just isn't an argument for going forward this other than vengeance. And being bored, I mean, vengeance is mine, saith the board. They want, people want this. The Trump derangement syndrome people want this. Some Republicans want this. Pat Toomey, who's not running for re-election, is out there wanting this. Cut number 6.
I think it's very unlikely, right? I mean, you did have 45 Republican senators vote to suggest that they didn't think it was appropriate to conduct a trial. So you can infer how likely it is that those folks will vote to convict. I disagreed with their assessment. I think it is constitutional. I think it's clearly constitutional to conduct a Senate trial with respect to an impeachment. In this case, the impeachment occurred prior to the president's leaving office. But, my job is going to be to listen to both sides of this, evaluate the arguments, and make a decision.
As you know, sir, there's a
Wait
struggle.
a minute. If you think it's clearly constitutional, the largest argument in President Trump's brief, pages 13 to 38, is why it's not constitutional. So you're not much of a juror, Senator Toomey. And I like Senator Toomey. He's been a great senator. Go read it. No one even read the briefs. The brief was filed yesterday. Maybe he had read I can't say that. Maybe he had read the brief. But that's not generally how we do it. John Cornyn on the Senate floor yesterday, cut number 4.
President Trump's words and actions leading up to the attack were reckless and wrong. But as we all know, the constitutional standard for impeachment isn't recklessness. Treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, those are the offenses that the Constitution allows Congress to impeach and remove a president from office for violating or from committing. Which brings us to one of the biggest concerns I have. Donald Trump is no longer president of the United States. He's a private citizen. Our Democratic colleagues moved so fast that they could impeach the president while he was in office, but failed to transmit the articles to the Senate until he became a private citizen. Legal experts have debated not only the constitutionality of trying a former president, but also the wisdom of doing so, and I share concerns on both those fronts. I think this ill-timed impeachment trial sets a dangerous precedent for future former presidents. As politicized as impeachment has become, it could become a reoccurring political exercise that would be toxic for our democracy.
If this is the best argument, it's the only argument. Text of the Constitution, practice at the time. At the time of the Constitution's adoption, there were state constitutions that provided explicitly for the impeachment of former officials. I think there were some had time limits, 18 months or something like that. But the framers didn't go with that, and they were careful. And they spent all summer, in the summer of 1787, talking about the executive. And high crimes and misdemeanors got a lot of attention. The impeachment provision got a lot of attention. No one thought of this. Burr was not impeached after his treason and after he shot and killed Alexander Hamilton. He was still vice president, when he killed Hamilton. He wasn't impeached. He wasn't impeached after he left. He was tried for treason, not convicted, acquitted of treason, but he wasn't impeached. We didn't impeach Nixon. We didn't impeach Clinton after he left office, and the allegations arose in addition to those that we knew about, but we also had a Republican Congress. This is just an incentive. It's the first breaking of the glass, and it's truly horrifically bad for the country. But I don't expect Democrats to stop. We know it's going to go. I do expect Republicans to stand tall on behalf of the Constitution. President Trump's conduct was reckless, like Senator Cornyn said, in office. I wrote it on that day in tweets, but this is an unconstitutional proceeding, and pay it no mind. I'll be right back with real news after this.
Don't forget to sign up for the Hugniverse. All of Hugh's broadcasts on demand, the after show, which in my opinion is worth the price all by itself, Dwayne FM, and all sorts of bonus content. www.hugniverse.com.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. The American experiment is founded upon a presupposition, a prior commitment to an ordered liberty, an established order. That means policies. It means a covenant. In our case, it means a constitution. As of right now, the U.S. Constitution is the longest surviving written constitution in human history. It's a remarkable document. All of that came to the fore in violent events that interrupted the joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. At the end of the day, our constitutional order proved itself once again resilient. But that doesn't take away any of the tragedy and the horror of what took place. It was an enormous stress test on ordered liberty, a stress test brought on by the President of the United States.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
It's an opportunity for the right, the left, conservatives, liberals, all Americans to repudiate political violence and reaffirm, once again, our commitment to ordered liberty. It's the American way. I'm Albert Mohler.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu.
This is Lon Heechen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The Biden administration announced in their first week that the U.S. is rejoining the World Health Organization. But the WHO is a flawed group, one that has performed poorly while the world has struggled with COVID-19. Early on, the group was far too deferential to China, even parroting Beijing's early claim that the virus could not be transmitted between humans. Since then, an independent panel concluded that the WHO dithered in its response, waiting too long to declare an international emergency. All the while, the WHO has continued to block Taiwan's participation because of political objections from the Chinese government, despite the fact that the world has much to learn from Taiwan's exceptional response to the virus. Before rejoining the WHO, we should have demanded some accountability and reform from the group for the $400 million in taxpayer dollars we send to it each year. It looks like we'll keep on writing blank checks to the WHO, which they are more than happy to keep cashing. I'm Lon Heechen.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at Public Policy. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
2020 was the largest percentage increase in homicides in American history. Murder was up nearly 37% in a sample of 57 large and medium-sized cities. Based on preliminary estimates, at least 2,000 more Americans, most of them black, were killed in 2020 than in 2019. You would think that would be a heavy focus or primary focus for the ruling class media. The local murder increases in 2020 were as following: 95% in Milwaukee, 78% in Louisville, 74% in Seattle, 72% in Minneapolis, 62% in New Orleans, and 58% in Atlanta. A lot of people blame it just purely on the pandemic stress. Do you not remember the defund the police narrative that swept our country for months? And Minneapolis basically did defund their police. One of the reasons why some of the police officers in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol tragedy did not have lethal weapons is because some of them were disarmed by Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. There is a WHO mission in China. It's going into the lab where the virus, which has decimated the world, originated, or some believe it originated. I'm not buying the wet market thing. And the Financial Times headline is, Wuhan mission unlikely to settle charge debate on virus origins. What a surprise, you might say. You see, they're not actually cooperating. They are kind of allowing them in on a very strict timetable, not giving them full access. They're doing basically what the Iranians did and the Iraqis did when confronted with international organizations trying to verify the lack of weapons of mass destruction. And so the idea that this is just classic Chinese Communist Party attempt to pretend that they're cooperative, and they're not cooperative. Here's the biggest issue. I had a discussion last night with some very smart friends about, we're not going out for a Valentine's Day dinner. We will eat outside occasionally. The restaurant has great spacing, et cetera, but we're not going out on Valentine's Day. It's like going out for a Super Bowl. I don't want to get this. I see Rod Dreher posted that his wife has it. Say a prayer for Rod's wife. It's not a pleasant disease. It can kill you. A lot of people get it and don't have a very bad time of it. I know everyone on the spectrum, from dead to I didn't even know I had it, and people in between. And I would prefer not to get it. I'm waiting for my vaccine. Here's the problem. Israel is ahead of us on this. They are the longest ahead. They are the ones who are, they've got the most people vaccinated as a percentage. They've got Benjamin Netanyahu has done a great job getting Israel vaccinated, but it's slowing down. They've got more vaccines than they do demand. With Israel's world-leading vaccination drive slowing because of a collapse in demand, writes the Times of Israel, the health ministry and some private firms are looking at ways to incentivize Israelis to go get their shots. The health ministry is reportedly weighing a plan to send out medical staff to offices of major companies around the country to vaccinate employees. All right, my question to you, 1-800-520-1234. I think we need to incentivize this early. I've already made this position known to people who are running this thing. I think we ought to give folks a tax credit. We ought to just say, hey, $100 if you get the vaccine off your taxes. Tax credits are really very, very powerful incentives. Doug Ducey has used them, and the state of Arizona has used them with the Arizona allows you to donate part of your taxes. If you owe $1,000, you can give, I guess, $200 to any not-for-profit that qualifies as a tax credit. And people use it. And not-for-profits benefit. Tax credits work. So if we want to incentivize people to get the vaccine, and I do, because so-called herd immunity occurs only when you get up above 70% of a population having it, and the closer you get to 100%, the better. We need to go and get people to get the vaccine. And right now, people can't even conceive of that because they can't get the vaccine. They want the vaccine. But in Israel, which is a couple of months ahead of us, better organized because they're not organized. They did, they called it organized chaos. They went in and grabbed the pizza guy to get a vaccine. They got everyone in that they could. They did whatever they want to get people to take the vaccine. And so I think that people need to really think right now when they're doing the legislation for the reconciliation about including pay people to get the vaccine. If you want people to get the vaccine, pay them to get the vaccine. This is just a pretty simple idea. Some people are not motivated by concerns of health. Younger people are not deterred because there is no apparent risk that is significant for them. But if you want people to get it during months ahead, pay them. 1-800-520-1234, connection to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
What else should people who are just waking up to the threat of whatever you want to call it, wokeism, critical theory, what else should they read? And then on top of that, James, if you really want to do something about it beyond, I don't know how we're going to begin to break up the mafia that is the schools of education, what can general listeners and viewers do, in your opinion?
Okay, so, I mean, I don't mean to shill for myself. It's not usually my style. But I created the website New Discourses to try to make something that people can read. It's not to say that there's nothing out there. There are other books. Mike Gonzalez's book, The Plot to Change America, is not bad. I've read that. Rod Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies, I think is important, especially to the second part of your question. Where I'm going to mention Solzhenitsyn here in a second, as it is, for what the average person can do. But I do encourage people to go read New Discourses. I think I've published close to 500,000 words in the last year, most of which I wrote myself, to try to get information out about this. So you can see how, I know it's a little bit heady, it's a little bit scholarly. You're right about Breitbart. Breitbart read these guys and is extremely good at breaking it down in a way that's more digestible than I'm a little scholarly past that. You may want to read. Is it Martin Gurry? Gurry is certainly the last name, Gurri, Revolt of the Public, for example, to see the role that the internet plays, these social networks play in what's happening now. It's a different kind of attack. It's not going to explain to you the nature of this side of the problem. It's going to explain to you the nature of the information world that we're trapped in. I do encourage everybody, though, to go read some Herbert Marcuse, especially Repressive Tolerance, for themselves directly.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Lived it. Look, let's be honest, Daryl. You suffered. You really suffered. You went through it, but you're living proof God did this in your life. We're not summed up by our baseball statistics, at least not in God's economy.
No, we're not, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I suffered, because it made me greater in the end. Because God looks at the end; He doesn't look at the beginning. I think people look at the beginning, and God has a long-term plan for our life, which is far greater than any baseball achievement or any success I've ever had in life. To be in the end part of my life and running the race for real and having victory, being victorious through Christ Jesus, and knowing that I'm victorious and not looking back. I think too many of us get consumed with what was the beginning of who we were. Had I got consumed with that, had I not known that I had a mother that was praying for me, that I had a wife that was praying for me, and that God had a plan for me, I wouldn't have never been able to get to this place I'm at today. I'm more victorious than any home run I ever hit. And I've hit some big ones in my days of playing ball. But in life, to be able to be in God's plan, I'm not qualified to preach the gospel, but the great one that lives inside of me is qualified to preach the gospel. And that I do understand, just like I understood the ability that I had to play the game with. I understood the talent, and I can go out there and perform. I had the great confidence in. See, I have the great confidence in the Holy Spirit as I go and do what I do now, as I go speak life, as I write a book. I didn't want to write another book, but for some reason, God wanted me to write another book, and here it is.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
The day has finally come. This is a CNN report. You've received the second dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. Does that mean you're free to go about life as you did before the pandemic once immunity kicks in? Sorry, there is no immunity passport yet, experts told CNN. There are still safety precautions you need to follow in order to keep you, your loved ones, and everyone else safe, protected from the deadly coronavirus. Now, here are some answers to questions. Can I please stop wearing a face mask? Let's face it, the answer is no. It's not 100% protection. Everyone is different. in terms of their immune responses as irrelevant to the issue of a mask. So that is that's the latest on that. Masks will still be mandatory even after you have a vaccination. Remember Typhoid Mary Mallon? She was an Irish immigrant who worked as a cook for New York families and refused to believe she was an asymptomatic conduit for typhoid fever because she remained healthy. Mallon contaminated at least 122 people in the 1880s. There you go. That's the proof.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I'm going to Robert right away in Grand Junction, Colorado, because I had lunch yesterday with a guy who's a legend in Orange County. I'm not going to tell you who it was. Legend. Grew up in Grand Junction, Robert. And, yeah, so, you know, whenever you see that kind of coincidence, it catches your eyes. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Miss you, Hugh. How are you, sir?
He said there were about 5 people in Grand Junction when he was there. He's a retired lawyer now. A little bit older than me, so it wasn't very big back then.
Well, it's tripled in size since he's left.
Yeah.
It's 65,000 right now.
Yeah, I'll tell him that. I'll pass that along. So what's on your mind?
Well, sir, I just want to say I can't wait to get the vaccination, and I didn't agree with the sheltering. I didn't agree with the shutting down, and I want to get back to normal where people can go and congregate and get back on buses without fearing some sort of disease in the air. So I'm all for vaccination. I wish I could fly over to Israel myself and get a vaccination.
That's what I thought. They had to open the airport and people can just do touch and goes and get a shot if Israel's got too much. But they don't have too much. They just can't get people to come in. Because, again, they didn't break it down in the article by demographics, who's not coming in, but their demand has dropped off dramatically. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that's it's just, I've never been for all this anti-vaccination stuff. I always vaccinated my kids. I knew the risk. And the risks are quite low compared to what could actually happen if we didn't vaccinate.
Yeah, I mean, this was the argument I had last night with my friends who wanted to go out for dinner on Valentine's Day with our wonderful wives. And I said, let me explain this vaccine thing to you. 6 feet apart is fine. You can be outside and 6 feet apart, and that's just not what they're offering where you want to go indoors and have a meal. And I'm close to being done with this thing. You know, I'll get my vaccine in a little bit, and then we'll go back to normal.
Right. Well, I went to a restaurant last week and had the 6 feet apart business and everything else, and I was able to sit down without a mask and enjoy a great meal.
This is common sense, and this is a show for conservative common sense. And common sense says wear a mask. Common sense says stay 6 feet apart. Eat outside if you go out. Common sense says don't live like a hermit. Common sense says don't have a trial for a former president. Common sense in the Constitution. That's what you get here. Robert, thank you, my friend. I got to do a market report brought to people by our wonderful sponsor, Birch Gold. If you're going to buy gold, you should have bought it yesterday because yesterday it was lower. It's at 1843, up 0.5% this morning. But it might go down, it might go up. You don't buy gold to trade. This isn't GameStop. Gold does not exist as AMC. Gold is not a put or a call option. Gold is something that is a portion of your portfolio. I say 10%. Some people say as high as 25%, but I'm a 10%er. Take part of your retirement, put it into physical gold and silver. Now, silver is going nutty right now, so I'm not recommending silver right now because speculators are back trying to corner the silver market again. And I don't, it's like Bitcoin. If something is going on and it's crazy, that's not for people who aren't specialists. I see all these kids who are afraid of missing out. Afraid of missing out is the dumbest reason to invest in something. And gold you're not going to miss out on gold. Gold's going to go in the vault and stay there. And it may be exactly what saves you from hyperinflation, or it may just increase a little bit and it may go down a little bit. It is security blanket. Gold is physical metals are a part of a overall financial portfolio, and Birch Gold makes it available for you. They'll tell you how to roll over a portion of your IRA if you just go to hughgold.com, hughgold.com, or if you text my name, Hugh, to 474747. Well, yesterday the Dow went up 237 points. The NASDAQ went up 131. Incredible. S&P went up 28. Overseas this morning, it's mixed. Japan and Hong Kong both went up. They're closed. England and Germany both are down a little bit. 10-year treasuries at 1.16. Oil is at $57 a barrel, which is about where it was yesterday. And it's sort of a ordinary day, except for silver. Ordinary day, but gold up 0.5%. So take advantage of the opportunity below 2,000. Get in and get some gold. Put it away. Forget about it. Hopefully your grandchildren will put it away and forget about it. Hopefully their grandchildren will put it away and forget about it. It's an anchor. That's what it is, and that's why you go to hughgold.com, hughgold.com. Now, this debate about COVID that I had last night, I really thought we were long past this. Minimizing how sick you can get, because there are a lot of people who die with COVID with a comorbidity. And the bad thinking is, well, I don't have a comorbidity, so I can't get sick. First of all, are you sure you don't have a comorbidity? Are you sure that you don't have a comorbidity? Are you obese? Do you have high blood pressure? Do you have asthma? Do you have something you don't know? Moreover, COVID itself can produce the comorbidity from which you die. Okay, so if you get pneumonia and you've got COVID, the pneumonia may have come from the COVID, but you'll be classified as a COVID death with a comorbidity. And that will still be a COVID death, in my view. There are only 6%, according to some claims, of people who die without a comorbidity. That should not give you a rest. It should not give you a pause. And I'm reading the Reuters article that goes through this, that goes through the CDC data. Conditions contributing to death where COVID-19 was listed on the death certificate includes both serious complications from COVID-19, such as respiratory failure and pneumonia, adult respiratory distress syndrome, as well as pre-existing condition. So a comorbidity is not the same as a pre-existing condition. You can get a comorbidity from COVID. That's why I think a lot of people are mistaken and they think the risk is low. But even if the risk was low, even if it was 20%, only 20% of people who die of COVID have no pre-existing condition, would you still take that shot? Really? This is not the flu. Much worse than the flu, and people need to go and get the shot when it becomes available. We also have to worry about, and I don't want to be the person who is, last year I was screaming from the rooftop a year ago that this was going to be a nightmare. I was doing it in January a year ago, and so I have no desire to say I told you so. But I also mentioned a year ago, you don't worry about the first virus. You worry about the second, the third, and the mutations, the iterations, again, based on the 1918 experience. When it went through 12 iterations in the summer in the United States of 1918 and came out deadlier. Now, thus far, people overreacted to the South African news that the AstraZeneca vaccine offered only minimal protection against mild to moderate cases of COVID-19. And they misread that. They thought that meant it offered no protection against COVID-19. It does offer a lot of protection against fatal COVID-19. All right, so people, science is not easy. Science is hard. But variants have begun to show up other places. There's a an entire globe where variants can emerge. The B.1.1.7 Kent variant in the United Kingdom. The 501.V2 variant in South Africa. The one causing the most concern, nicknamed Eric or Eek, is E484K. And it is found in Brazil. That's got people a little bit more worried than the other two. There will be more variants. So the key question is, how quickly can vaccines be adopted to new variants? The threat is real. Moderna said last month it's beginning trials of a booster tailored to target the 501V2 strain after it discovered that its vaccine elicited antibody levels 6 times lower for that variant. So they're on it. There's money to be made here. Science is at work. People are on it. But the best thing you can do is to get it as soon as you can. I'll just repeat that. The best thing you can do is to get it as soon as you can. Other news. Benjamin Netanyahu's trial, that trial's been postponed longer than Trump's. And he's still in office. Benjamin Netanyahu's trial is going to be put off until after the election in March. The evidentiary stage, when he's going to have to go to court 3 times a week, not going to happen until after the March 23rd election. So we're going to miss that drama. Iran has launched a new rocket showing advances in potential missile technology. And the story I am going to talk about with Admiral Stavridis next hour, hacker changed chemical level in Florida's city's water system. A water treatment plant in Oldsmar, Florida was hacked, and the intruder briefly increased the amount of lye used to treat water to a dangerous level. A plant operator noticed the alteration Friday and immediately reversed it, avoiding adverse effects on the city's water supply. Now that is attempted murder of many, many, many people. So water systems, like other public utility systems, are part of the nation's critical infrastructure and are vulnerable to terrorists. Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Galtieri said at a news conference on Monday about the incident. The hacking began on Friday morning at the plant in Oldsmar, a city of about 15,000 people near Tampa Bay. Around 8 a.m., a plant operator noticed that someone remotely accessed a computer system he was monitoring that controls chemicals used to treat water. The intruder got into the utilities control system through TeamViewer, the tool that allows engineers to monitor and repair computers and network machines. Now, how do you feel about that? I don't like to give anyone ideas, but that is troubling. That is really troubling. I'll be right back we'll talk about that with Admiral Stavridis. Time for ReliefFactor.com. There it is. I carry Kirkman, Resveratrol, Omega. I do not have coffee today. I'm doing an experiment. The show without coffee. Instead, I've got sparkling water from Trader Joe's. And I got enough, I think. Yep, I only had a sip. Down they went. You don't need hot coffee. You don't need lukewarm coffee. You don't need any coffee at all. You take a sip of water. It's that easy to take. 4 pills, right? They're not small, but they're not large, and they're wonderfully made, and they're easy to swallow. I carry Kirkman, Resveratrol, Omega. The 4 natural supplements that combine to give you a little bit of an edge, a little bit of a help in reducing the pain that comes with exercise and aging. No magic bullet, no X-ray powers. It's simply science. It's good science. It's good supplement. The only supplement I take, the one that you ought to join tens of thousands of people in taking every day. Coming up after the break, David Dreyer will talk about who's going to get these payments, including people in the country without permission. We shall see. Stay tuned.
This is Lon Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The Biden administration announced in their first week that the U.S. is rejoining the World Health Organization. But the WHO is a flawed group. one that has performed poorly while the world has struggled with COVID-19. Early on, the group was far too deferential to China, even parroting Beijing's early claim that the virus could not be transmitted between humans. Since then, an independent panel concluded that the WHO dithered in its response, waiting too long to declare an international emergency. All the while, the WHO has continued to block Taiwan's participation because of political objections from the Chinese government, despite the fact that the world has much to learn from Taiwan's exceptional response to the virus. Before rejoining the WHO, we should have demanded some accountability and reform from the group for the $400 million in taxpayer dollars we send to it each year. It looks like we'll keep on writing blank checks to the WHO, which they are more than happy to keep cashing. I'm Lan Hee Chen.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
How can they do what they do to the Republicans, and Republicans cannot do anything to them? They have been cited many times of, I'm going to take Trump out tonight. I'm going to take him out and beat the hell out of it. Why? It doesn't make any sense. But they can prosecute them, but they can't be prosecuted. You know what I'm saying?
Of course I know what you're saying. We've been talking about it all week. You've got Chuck Schumer outside the Supreme Court, all but threatening Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. You've got Maxine Waters saying, gather around Trump cabinet members, let them know they're not welcome anywhere anymore. Yeah, we've played that whole montage of Democrats talking about fight, fight, fight. Yep. Eric Swalwell had a relationship with a Chinese spy. He hasn't lost his committee positions on the Intel Committee. Ilhan Omar hasn't lost her committee assignments. Jews have brainwashed the world. Jewish lawmakers have dual loyalties. Hasn't lost any committee assignments. Chuck Schumer's 1974 racist scheme to get rid of black people out of an area in Flatbush. What's that? You didn't know about it? I've done a video about it. Go on YouTube. I've written about it. A guy named Jay Homnick, who was there when this racist scheme was hatched, has written about it. American Spectator. Article is called Race to the Top. Google it. I've interviewed him a couple times on my program. Google that. Nobody seems to care.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt, good morning to you. I'm joined by David Drucker of the Washington Examiner. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm great, Hugh. Good morning.
Look, before I go to the recall, which I know you're covering, there was an article in Time magazine by Molly Ball this week that suggested that prior to the election, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO published a statement on Election Day about how they would work to make sure that the election was not stolen. The Chamber's gone pretty hard left, but I never knew that they've done a deal with the AFL-CIO. What's going on at the Chamber? And am I the only person to notice that all the Republicans got fired, that Donahue quit, and that the new nice person on top of it is actually probably a liberal?
So this is a story that's been going on for 2 years in Washington. So maybe you're the only nerd in Washington who missed this, which I say affectionately. But those of us who cover inside politics in Washington have been watching changes at the chamber. And this is part of sort of the impact of the Trump administration and Trump era, because corporations that have been longtime donors and members of the chamber, and even if they wouldn't parade around, were very supportive of Republican fiscal policy because it's been good for their bottom line and in their view, very good for the economy. So they were pleased to support all of the Republican Senate candidates that have run over the past decade, and they were perfectly happy to help elect a Republican Senate and keep the Senate Republican from 2014 through just this year. We're not comfortable with the president's behavior, and they were just very unhappy with this idea that they were supporting Trump versus supporting Mitch McConnell. And so the chamber, because of that, started to sort of diversify its political support, encouraging bipartisan legislation on the Hill, embracing some, though not all, of the Democrats' agenda on some issues. And the staff started to change as well. And so what you're seeing is something that Republicans have noticed. They weren't happy about it, and they feel like it, in some ways, made a difference in midterm elections in 2018, for sure, because they didn't have the same allies they used to have to counter the Democratic Party and their allies in these down ballot races.
Well, the chamber is supposed to be Main Street, not big corporations. So I'm curious whether or not they're losing members, or are people just quitting?
Right, but the United States Chamber of Commerce was never Main Street. The United States Chamber of Commerce has always been this sort of industry group of big business in Washington. And they were losing members because of the public relations issues they were having with Trump, and the fact that there was a lot of pressure on these corporations from a sort of outward-facing brand perspective of being too closely associated with the 45th president. But I think we should understand that this was the industry group of blue-chip American corporations, and they would support the chamber, and the chamber would support Republican Senate candidates and Republican House candidates because their policies tended to be more favorable to corporate America, but the chamber and its members also believe that that was good for their employees. Obviously, people will debate that, but one thing we've noticed over the past 4 or 5 years, as everything, nobody seems to escape scrutiny, and corporations ultimately are afraid of losing customers, and so we've seen them adjust their political posture based on that.
Well, I think I'll come back to this because I think the chamber is supposed to represent American business, not just blue chip business. But we'll come back to that. Tell me what you know about the recall in California.
Well, what I've discovered this week, and of course I'm now approaching this from Washington, whereas 18 years ago I was in Sacramento to cover the last one. But they expect to turn in the signatures they need the first week of March. I'm told that they have an 85% validity rate, and that in the past month or two, they've started to see an increase in petitions from independent voters, which are now referred to in California, I guess, as NPP, nonpartisan, something or other, and about and some Democrats, and so they're going to have the petitions they need. There are more steps in order to trigger an actual election than existed with the last one, but those steps are likely to happen. And so you could have an election in the fall, in the late fall of this year. But it looks like I don't see a scenario, I guess, in which somehow the election is derailed. And so then the question is who runs, and particularly do any heavyweights on the left run?
And what have you heard? Because I've also understand the Democrats are maneuvering to push it back to March of next year because they want more Democrats to vote because the Gavin Newsom's in big trouble. And we've got 2 Republicans in. Any Democrats at all, David? 10 seconds.
Not yet, but stay tuned.
Stay tuned. If one Democrat gets in, it's for real. That's my view. If one Democrat gets in, it's a for real deal. Stay tuned, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show. Thank you,
David. Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
This is now a playbook. The secret history of the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election. This is not something where they just are going to disassemble this. This is how they're going to do it from this point forward. So what are the big takeaways? Number one, the left is just now realizing how much power they really have over us. I think they're still learning how to use that power. Number two, the left is willing at almost all costs to sacrifice truth for power. Number three, persuasion means very little when the other side is actually concerned of how the election is going to be conducted. You know, we joked around throughout the the first couple weeks after early November, after the election. We said it doesn't matter how people vote; it matters who counts the votes. Remember, we joked about that. Well, they say here in Podhorser's presentations, winning the vote was only the first step to winning the election. After that came winning the count. Winning the count. Can you believe it? Not just what people think, but actually how the votes are counted. Winning the certification, winning the Electoral College, and winning the transition. This is now going to be how they will handle every single election from this point forward.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. The American experiment is founded upon a presupposition, a prior commitment to an ordered liberty, an established order. That means policies. It means a covenant. In our case, it means a constitution. As of right now, the U.S. Constitution is the longest surviving written constitution in human history. It's a remarkable document. All of that came to the fore in violent events that interrupted the joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. At the end of the day, our constitutional order proved itself once again resilient. But that doesn't take away any of the tragedy and the horror of what took place. It was an enormous stress test on ordered liberty, a stress test brought on by the President of the United States.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
It's an opportunity for the right, the left, conservatives, liberals, all Americans to repudiate political violence and reaffirm, once again, our commitment to ordered liberty. It's the American way. I'm Albert Mohler.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
I think the Lincoln Project is specifically a smear campaign to break down what we might call Trumpism, what I think could be better called MAGA, Make America Great Again. If you want to, I know it's your show, so if you want to call it America First, I suppose
MAGA's
that's okay
fine.
too.
MAGA's fine.
MAGA, I think, is probably most appropriate, though, which is this kind of not nationalistic but nationistic idea that people should be able to have nations that are sovereign, not subject to supranational entities. It's not like rah, 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 USA, USA, although if people want to feel that way about their country, more power to them. But that's not the point. Poland should be able to be Poland, France should be able to be France, the UK should be able to be the UK, and so on. And that it's a broader philosophy in that regard, and that we should, in fact, pursue our own national interests as each individual nation, which is really what MAGA, when applied to the MAGA, is that applied to the American context. Yeah. And so these guys are smear artists who are attempting to destroy and discredit that because they are making money and their people are making money hand over fist from the same foreign wars and the same garbage that people turn to Trump to get away from. And I say that being, I was horrified in 2016 by Trump. I was utterly against him. I had Trump derangement syndrome like everybody else, or half of everybody else, I guess. And now it's like much more clear to me what was actually going on and what's going on now.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
I didn't know when he was playing for the Mets that Gary Carter was a Christian. And I always feel like the media is so secular that they don't know. They just kind of shy away from this.
And Gary Carter was a phenomenal person. We admired him, but we didn't understand him because his ability to play baseball was great. But also at the same time, he was so happy. His joy was so real. And we all wanted that, but everybody thought he was, they thought he was fake, but he wasn't fake. Gary Carter was a Christian from the age of 20 all the way into his whole entire career and his life being out of the big league. So he lived a completely different life. Yeah, he was very successful, Hall of Fame, but at the same time, he lived the life of the Lord, and he was a prime example. Him and Mookie Wilson, two guys on our team that were prime example of what a godly man looked like, what a man looks like without a uniform on. And I think that represents more than anything than having a uniform on and maybe struggling and going through some hard times, from a professional standpoint. But from a spiritual standpoint, they didn't have to go through that process in their life when they were playing. And I wish I could have experienced that. I had to experience so many downfalls and pitfalls, through my career. And I was multi-talented. I could play, but I couldn't live. But today, I look at God and I thank God for his grace, the grace that I didn't deserve. That's 2 Corinthians 12:19. He says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. And in my weakness, his grace was sufficient for me, and it allowed me to be the man I am today in Christ.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
The left always does this. Always. This is part of their textbook policy. They make rules that ruin things, and then they pass laws to deal with the ruination that they brought about. It is classic. You know why the Republicans oppose this 1.8 or so trillion? The primary reason is it's going to state governments. They're bailing out the Democrats who ran profoundly irresponsible operations in spending money that they didn't have. So there's no consequence. That's the key. There's no consequence to democratic malfeasance. There you go. We'll bail you out. We'll print more monopoly money. Wow, it's really something. The whole thing is really something, the time that we are in now. Right. Let's go to Cynthia in Palos Park, Illinois. Hello.
Hi, Dennis. How are you this morning?
I'm well, thank you.
I'm calling because I wanted to tell you that my friend Karen, my best friend, and I are planning on going with you on the Stand with Israel tour. And my reason for going is I'm feeling very, very unsettled in my life right now with what's going on to my beloved country. And I want to go to Israel to find some peace and some wisdom. And I'm wondering how many others that listen to your show are feeling the way I'm feeling, this loss of optimism with.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. It's Hugh Hewitt. The Perry Mason impeachment gets going today. We know how it's going to end, but the people who hate Trump just hate Trump so much that they cannot let it go. Joining me is Byron York of the Washington Examiner. Hi, Byron.
Good morning, Hugh.
So I just got it tweeted at by Jonah. Lots of people are yelling at me because I just think this is an open shut case. The Constitution doesn't provide for it. Justice Story said it didn't provide for it. The Pennsylvania state Constitution at the time provided for post-tenure impeachments. The framers were in Pennsylvania. They knew about it. They didn't provide for it. They didn't go after Aaron Burr. They didn't go after Richard Nixon. It's never been done before. It's an open and shut case. Done, done, done. And we got a half dozen law professors and every Democrat and 5 Republicans saying that's not enough for me. I don't have to be intimidated by these people, Byron. It's not a closed question. Is anyone on the edge?
Listen, I agree with you on this. And by the way, the trial schedule, and Schumer and McConnell didn't even release the trial schedule until about 4:00 on Monday. Less than 24 hours before it was going to begin. But anyway, it's going to start with this very debate. There's going to be 4 hours divided equally between the two sides of debate on the constitutionality, and then they're going to have a vote, and the side that wants to go forward with the trial is going to win, and then it'll get on to the presentation. But listen, I agree with you, and I just think there's a lot of reasons. And as a matter of fact, I did a piece on this, a newsletter on this, going through 5 reasons why it's unconstitutional, and also looking at the single best argument on the other side, which is the one you were surely aware of by Michael McConnell, the former federal judge. And you're absolutely right. One, when the founders referred to the president, they meant the president of the United States. There's only one of them at a time. 2, if you look at the Federalist Papers and you look at the record of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, they clearly thought about impeachment as a vehicle for removal of the president. They never talked about using it for a former official. And that includes, by the way, the state conventions, which were then held to ratify the convention after it was finished in Philadelphia. You're absolutely right. There's no precedent of using this for a president of the United States. They all talk about, well, there was a Secretary of War in 1868. By the way, it's not a great example because he was acquitted because there were a lot of senators who were concerned about trying a former official. So the only real precedent we have is Richard Nixon, who resigned as the House was preparing to impeach him, and that put an end to the impeachment. And as a matter of fact, the fact that Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon highlighted the fact that the founders had included a mechanism for dealing with wrongdoing by former presidents, which is they can be tried, prosecuted, and tried in the criminal justice system. So, I can go on, but it's clearly unconstitutional.
And I do not even resort to Justice Story, whose famed constitutional commentary is genuinely and often held up as the gold standard. Said, nah, not happening. So Jonah Goldberg, our friend, tweets, I honestly don't get this terrible precedent stuff. He says he honestly doesn't get it. This trial is happening, so the precedent is set. That is not actually a response. Number 2, the fact 67 votes are so hard for Trump's outrageous behavior suggests it won't be overused. That's not actually an argument. The precedent is dragging the guy back and continuing on with arguments that existed during the presidency and sort of a politics of vengeance. Letting Trump's actions go unsanctioned is a far worse precedent. So he's saying even if he's acquitted, he's not acquitted. This is going to unleash politics of vengeance down the road, Byron. I don't know why people don't understand that.
Yeah, I think it's been clear that Democrats, especially in the House, have been obsessed with Donald Trump for about 5 years now. Certainly began thinking about removing him from office before he actually entered office. And especially the Speaker of the House has just seemed obsessed. Remember, she made remarks around the first impeachment when she knew that it would fail in the Senate. She pointed to the president, impeachment is forever. You'll have this stain forever. Remember that when he gave the State of the Union address amid the impeachment, she made an actual show of tearing up the paper copy of his speech, did that for the cameras. And so, she shows signs of actually being obsessed with getting Donald Trump. And then we know that the House just threw all process out the window to pass an impeachment article in about a minute and a half, and there's no reason they couldn't have tried to force the Senate. Remember, the Senate was not in session, and they could have actually tried harder to force the Senate to take this, so they could try the president before he left office. After, if we're throwing all the rules out the window, why not have a 10-minute trial? But they didn't, and here we are.
Well, let me add a couple more ingredients to that stew. We've also got Adam Schiff, who we all know, I believe it is dispositively demonstrated that he has lied repeatedly about many things relevant to Donald Trump in order to advance his career and injure the president. He is invested in making sure that Trump is crushed and discredited, and that he is responsible for the 800 people in the Congress, and that this trial goes forward. We also have an enormous Trump-hating industry that goes on, Byron, that is invested in destroying the Republican brand by destroying Trump. And we have the TDSers, the never-Trumpers, who must be vindicated by anything that helps Trump down. But they don't understand this is not how history's going to look at this. History's going to look at this as the title of your book, obsession.
And it's a bad trend. I mean, remember, the Constitution is ratified in 1789. The first impeachment is in 1869. There's not another impeachment until 1998, and now we've had two in the space of 13 months. That, I think, also argues for the idea that there is an obsession here. And what can I say?
Well, let me say this as well. It's occurring while we're about to spend $2 trillion. Now, in 2008, the global fiscal stimulus was 2% of worldwide GDP. This year, it is going to be 12% of global GDP. This is not an insignificant moment in the history of world economics. It could be a backbreaker, and we're doing this.
This is the Lawrence Summers article, which caused such consternation among many Democrats, which is the stimulus is too big. I mean, if they pass what President Biden and Democrats want to pass, it's too big for the problem. All Democrats believe that the stimulus they passed in 2009 was too small for the problem in the early months of the Obama administration. Now they propose to overcorrect by passing one that's too big for the problem. But you're right. This is a debate that is now being put to the side while the Senate handles this trial of former President Trump. I've looked over the schedule. I don't see how they can do it in less than a week. And there are plenty of opportunities for it to stretch out well beyond that.
Well, and I'm a little bit mystified that the president's, quote, legal team, and I don't know who they are, so I don't have an opinion on them, did not sue to enjoin it in the 11th Circuit, start in the district court and try and get to the 11th Circuit, but they didn't. And they've had just a churn. This is so, if people think this is what legal process is supposed to be, they're wrong. This is not legal process, Brian. That's the other meta argument that is occurring to me as a lawyer and as a law professor. This is not the way anything has ever happened in the United States before. We've never had this kind of thing happen.
I think the legal team may have based their decision on their belief that the president's acquittal is assured after the Rand Paul vote, in which 45 Republicans voted that this is to say that this was an unconstitutional process. I think they thought they had it licked at that point. But I think everybody who's been concerned about this and the constitutionality of it you and I have discussed this, whether it would be a good idea to have a court actually rule on this, to see whether a court would say, no, we're staying out of this. This is not the court's business. Congress can do what it wants, or whether they would rule on the constitutional question here.
Yep. And Byron, we will not know because they didn't go that way. But I'll continue to talk to Byron. I'm sure he's updating Obsession as we speak. Thank you, my friend. I'll be right back. America, 1-800-520-1234, connection to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
You notice the figure 1.9 trillion just kind of rolls off the tongue. Now keep in mind, this is the administration that said they wanted to unify the country. There had to be healing. There's going to be bipartisanship. And you know it was all horse bleep. And did the same thing that the Obama administration did. The Obama administration came in. Remember all their health care plans? And the Republicans, Ryan wanted to meet him halfway and had all sorts of ideas. And Obama says, dude. We won the election, you lost, so we ran on Obamacare, and we're going to do Obamacare, so just sit down and watch how we work. Same thing here. Not a single Republican buying in on $1.9 trillion. $1.9 trillion used to sound like a lot of money. But you know who said something about it being excessive and likely to ignite inflation like we've never seen before? Larry Summers. You remember Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary under President, let me think, I can't remember. I remember now, Barack Obama. Op-ed piece. Could ignite inflationary pressures, quote, of a kind we have not seen in a generation, end of quote. See, young people don't remember inflation. 13.5% during the recession that Ronald Reagan dealt with, 13.5%. Prices increasing 13.5% every year. You guys don't know from that. Again, this is Larry Summers. This is the Treasury Secretary under Obama.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
We've got to open up our schools. We've got to let our kids get an education again. Lori Lightfoot, furious, it seems, with the Chicago Teachers Union. So listen to Trey Gowdy's monologue last night on Fox News, recounting a story and tying it together with his wife, who apparently is an educator, and what's happening in cities like Chicago right now.
I want you to keep this dichotomy in your mind. The image of a young boy walking to school for hours, getting in the car with a stranger because he understood the power of education to change his life. And now contrast that with the image of those dancing teachers in Chicago. That child knew the power of education and being in school. I wish the teachers in Chicago knew as much as he did.
That's powerful. And he's right. He's right. 800-655-Mike. Let's get your reaction. Here's the Chicago Mayor, Lori Lightfoot, begging the Chicago teachers, please go back to work.
And as the expression goes, the proof is in the pudding. CPS had 3 weeks of successful implementation of these mitigation plans in our schools. That was until the CTU blew up that success and created chaos that we are now enduring. And also remember, the CPS staff and principals have been in our schools throughout this pandemic, feeding our kids, getting them ready for the return of students, and continuing the hard work every single day. And
what are the Chicago teachers doing?
There are teachers.
They're making dancing videos. They're by themselves on Zoom dancing and...
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
Seemingly misrepresenting where she was and what she was doing during the Capitol tragedy. For what reason, I'm not exactly sure.
I don't know, so deeply rattled.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Let's check the market, shall we? Brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. Right now is a great time to buy a house. Everyone knows that inflation is a risk. It's always a risk, but it's a significant risk when this amount of money has been spent in rescue and recovery efforts following the pandemic. And therefore, it's always necessary to keep an eye on where the 10-year Treasury is. Now, yesterday it was at 1.17. Now it's down to 1.16. So it's holding steady around there. That is about 100% increase from 6 months ago when it was down to 0.62. Getting close to doubling in 6 months. And if it doubles again, then you'll be back to 2.4, where we were before this whole mess began. I've argued for a long time, if you're ever going to buy a house or refinance, right now is the time to do it. It's always a good investment, real estate. It's even a good investment when rates are 4 and 5%, and it gets more difficult the higher it is. But the longer you wait, the less the window is open. The window is open right now at andrewandtodd.com. You need to call them to get started or go to their website. They are with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. They will take care of you. I've known them both for a long time, but their phone number is 888-888-1172. 888-888-1172. If you go to their website, andrewandtodd.com, answer a couple of questions, they'll get back to you quickly with what is the best choice for you. Yesterday, the Dow went up 237 points. The NASDAQ went up 131 points, which was almost a full percent. The S&P went up 28 points, 0.75%. Just a great day in markets. They know the stimulus is coming. The rescue is going to be large, and it's going to create a high. I mean, that money's got to go somewhere, and people are not going to go out and start shopping in malls again. They're going to probably buy stock, and the whole Robin Hood thing and everything else is kind of pointing towards the money being invested in equities. So the market, then Tesla bought $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin, which is a cryptocurrency, it's an imaginary currency, is now at $44,868.98 per Bitcoin. Now that is a proxy currency. It doesn't really exist. It's not backed by the full faith and credit of anything. You'll never get me to buy Bitcoin, and it might go to 1 million, and every one of you might be a millionaire who's listening. You will never get me to touch that stuff. It is not backed by the full faith and sovereign of any government. The credit of the United States is behind the American dollar. The credit of the United Kingdom is behind the pound. The credit of nothing is behind Bitcoin, except other people who own Bitcoin. So I'll never, maybe it is the greatest thing, and everyone will be using Bitcoin in 20 years, and it will have supplanted the dollar as the basket, or a basket of currencies, including Bitcoin, will have supplanted the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. Not for me. I'm not doing that. I'm not a gambler. I didn't buy GameStop, not buying AMC, not going to buy Bitcoin, wouldn't be prudent, not going to do it. What I think you ought to buy is real estate. And if you've got a son or a daughter, or a grandson or a granddaughter, and you'd like to help them out a lot, be a non-occupying co-signer right now. Put your name on the line with their application, get their pre-qualification letter, and let them go shopping for the house that they want. Best thing you could do for their life, for their financial life, is get them into a house they can afford, leveraging the credit that you don't need or need to use. And that's with andrewandtodd.com. If I can go back and play again, John Cornyn on the floor of the Senate, cut number 4.
President Trump's words and actions leading up to the attack were reckless and wrong. But as we all know, the constitutional standard for impeachment isn't recklessness. Treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, those are the offenses that the Constitution allows Congress to impeach and remove a president from office for violating or from committing. Which brings us to one of the biggest concerns I have. Donald Trump is no longer president of the United States. He's a private citizen. Our Democratic
John Cornyn is the only member of the Senate who served on the Supreme Court, and he often sounds like it. He'll be on later today. Don't go anywhere, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. The American experiment is founded upon a presupposition, a prior commitment to an ordered liberty, an established order. That means policies. It means a covenant. In our case, it means a constitution. As of right now, the U.S. Constitution is the longest surviving written constitution in human history. It's a remarkable document. All of that came to the fore in violent events that interrupted the joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. At the end of the day, our constitutional order proved itself once again resilient. But that doesn't take away any of the tragedy and the horror of what took place. It was an enormous stress test on ordered liberty, a stress test brought on by the President of the United States.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
It's an opportunity for the right, the left, conservatives, liberals, all Americans to repudiate political violence and reaffirm, once again, our commitment to ordered liberty. It's the American way. I'm Albert Mohler.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
What else should people who are just waking up to the threat of whatever you want to call it, wokeism, critical theory, what else should they read? And then on top of that, James, if you really want to do something about it beyond, I don't know how we're going to begin to break up the mafia that is the schools of education, what can general listeners and viewers do, in your opinion?
Okay, so, I mean, I don't mean to shill for myself. It's not usually my style. But I created the website New Discourses to try to make something that people can read. It's not to say that there's nothing out there. There are other books. Mike Gonzalez's book, The Plot to Change America, is not bad. I've read that. Rod Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies, I think is important, especially to the second part of your question. Where I'm going to mention Solzhenitsyn here in a second, as it is, for what the average person can do. But I do encourage people to go read New Discourses. I think I've published close to 500,000 words in the last year, most of which I wrote myself, to try to get information out about this. So you can see how, I know it's a little bit heady, it's a little bit scholarly. You're right about Breitbart. Breitbart read these guys and is extremely good at breaking it down in a way that's more digestible than I'm a little scholarly past that. You may want to read. Is it Martin Gurri? Gurri is certainly the last name, Gurri, Revolt of the Public, for example, to see the role that the internet plays, these social networks play in what's happening now. It's a different kind of attack. It's not going to explain to you the nature of this side of the problem. It's going to explain to you the nature of the information world that we're trapped in. I do encourage everybody, though, to go read some Herbert Marcuse, especially Repressive Tolerance, for themselves directly.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Lived it. Look, let's be honest, Daryl. You suffered. You really suffered. You went through it, but you're living proof God did this in your life. We're not summed up by our baseball statistics, at least not in God's economy.
No, we're not, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I suffered because it made me greater in the end. Because God looks at the end; He doesn't look at the beginning. I think people look at the beginning, and God has a long-term plan for our life, which is far greater than any baseball achievement or any success I've ever had in life. To be in the end part of my life and running the race for real and having victory, being victorious through Christ Jesus, and knowing that I'm victorious and not looking back. I think too many of us get consumed with what was the beginning of who we were. Had I got consumed with that, had I not known that I had a mother that was praying for me, that I had a wife that was praying for me, and that God had a plan for me, I wouldn't have never been able to get to this place I'm at today. I'm more victorious than any home run I ever hit. And I've hit some big ones in my days of playing ball, But in life, to be able to be in God's plan, I'm not qualified to preach the gospel, but the great one that lives inside of me is qualified to preach the gospel. And that I do understand, just like I understood the ability that I had to play the game with. I understood the talent, and I can go out there and perform. I had the great confidence in, I have the great confidence in the Holy Spirit as I go and do what I do now, as I go speak life, as I write a book. I didn't want to write another book, but for some reason, God wanted me to write another book, and here it is.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
The day has finally come. This is
Welcome, America. That music means Admiral Stavridis joins us, retired former admiral in the United States Navy, former commander of the Allied Supreme Command of NATO and of Southern Command. Good morning, Admiral. How are you this morning?
Doing well, Hugh, down here in Florida. All good.
Well, I've got 3 stories for you today that I'd love you to get your comment on. In Southern Command days, I would assume Haiti was in your jurisdiction, was it, or was it not?
Oh, of course. And
Okay.
I've been there many, many times.
Well, it's plunged into a constitutional crisis, the latest. Whenever we talk about Haiti, it's never good news, right? And they are having convulsions over whether or not the president is the president. What ought we to do are you following this story, and what ought we to do? Because it seems that Haiti, as one of the commentators in the Washington Post story says, is Somalia in our hemisphere.
I think it is not anywhere near as bad as Somalia. For starters, it doesn't export terrorism the way Somalia does. It's not a base for Al-Shabaab, a big Islamic radical terrorist group. So let's keep it in perspective. It is a very unlucky country, and every time Haiti starts to get traction, something bad always happens. And sometimes it's a natural disaster. You'll recall the big earthquake back in 2009 or so. You'll recall the waves of cholera that swept through it. But above all, it has political turmoil, which brings us to the moment. Yes, I'm following this story. They have a president who is claiming that he should be able to stay another year in office because the start of his term got delayed politically. It's a fabricated argument. It has no bearing. Here's what we ought to do. Let me start with what we should not do. We should not intervene militarily in any way. You'll recall, Hugh, we have a long history over the century of intervening in Haiti. It's a bad thing militarily. We ought to go to the Organization of American States. The headquarters is right there in Washington. It's the mini United Nations for the hemisphere. They ought to take this problem on. And by the way, if we need peacekeeping troops, the president is there to send Brazilians and Chileans. That's who was in Haiti keeping the peace after some of these natural disasters. So stay out of it as a unilateral act. Go to the OAS, work it within the hemisphere.
So there is no doubt in your mind that the claim of the incumbent president, who yesterday had 23 people arrested, is an illegitimate claim. And so we need it's always important at the beginning of this to get our moral bearings right. It is the incumbent president who has the illegitimate claim.
That is my view based on what I have seen in press reporting. I have not dived into this one at a classified level. As you know, I still hold a security clearance, but I've seen no classified information. But I've seen nothing in the open press that would, in my view, lend support to his claim or his legitimacy.
Okay, and then if that is the case, we have to actually lean on the OAS to do their job, because we do not want pretenders like Maduro and other places to get legs. I mean, that's how authoritarian regimes begin, is with the initial sin, the original sin.
That's exactly right. And you'll recall around the time you and I were graduating from college in the late 70s, early 80s, otherwise known as 1.2 million years ago. In those days, almost every nation in this hemisphere south of the United States was a dictatorship, normally a military dictatorship. That's been turned around, other than Nicaragua, arguably. Obviously, it has not turned around in Cuba and has not turned around in Venezuela. We don't want to add Haiti to the list of backsliders.
All right, now let's go to the second one. Iran launched a new rocket yesterday. Tehran's new rocket features a key component seen in ICBMs. Right now they have ballistic missiles. They do not have intercontinental ballistic missiles. How significant and what's it do to the Biden team's approach, do you think, when Secretary Blinken and the president sit down to talk about this?
It is significant, and it really is just about range. You can make the argument, by the way, that some of Tehran's missiles are already intercontinental in that they can reach portions of southeastern Europe from Iran. But let's park that and simply say this is going to increase the range, the accuracy, the lethality of their long suite of missiles. So what it should do, in my view, for the president and for Secretary Tony Blinken, who I know very well, both of them, and I think they will do this, it's a flashing yellow light. It means, hey, let's slow down. And frankly, I have said on your show many times, the last thing in the world we want to do is simply jump back into the old Iran nuclear deal. We ought to go slow. We got to see, for starters, Iran come back in compliance with the deal, and the president has said that, and so has Secretary Blinken. But I would argue, let's not go to Tehran. Let's go to Brussels. Let's get alignment with our allies, and then go collectively to Tehran and renegotiate this deal. And the Iranians are not going to like that. They're going to make a lot of hay out of, hey, you broke an agreement, and et cetera, et cetera. They have elections coming in June, which will complicate all this. My advice is go slow here. Eventually, we're going to have to get a new deal. This is another good indicator that simply jumping back into the old one, not a good idea.
The Post reports, until negotiations start, Iran is racing to build leverage and dissuade any American ambition to curtail its conventional missile program, according to Fabian Hinz, an independent open-source intelligence analyst with expertise in missiles. Quote, this was a very, very clear message by the Iranians that they are advancing and that they can build longer-range stuff if they want to. They want to show that if you put pressure on our missiles, we can react. Well, of course they can react. That doesn't mean we don't put pressure on their missiles. Do you think we ought to demand that the missiles be included in any new deal, Admiral?
I would certainly put that up front as one of two major conditions in any deal, in addition to the nuclear. The two new conditions have to be controls on their long-range missile systems, as you just mentioned. And the other one is their activities all around the region, supporting rebels in Yemen, supporting radical elements in the Iraqi political system, their pressure on Hezbollah, which derives pressure onto Israel. So there are two new things, if you will, that we're just going to have to negotiate with the Iranians. And yes, they're trying to build leverage, showing us longer-range missiles. What else are they doing? They just seized a South Korean tanker and have held it now for some weeks on a fake claim of environmental damage. They're going to continue to show they can control the Strait of Hormuz. They can launch long-range missiles. I wouldn't be surprised to see a cyber attack, perhaps against Saudi oil fields. Another drone attack has occurred a year and a half ago against Saudi oil fields. That's their idea of leverage, bad behavior. They're taking a page out of Kim's playbook in North Korea, and it's not smart because it is not going to pay off for them in negotiations.
That was Secretary Pompeo's argument all along, that all we ask them to be is a normal country. They act in ways that no other normal country acts in. So all we want them to do. So if the Biden-Blinken team negotiated on that basis, I wouldn't have an objection to an agreement that got those three things done, because then they'd be a normal regime.
Exactly. And that ought to be the storyline, the narrative that we're taking to Brussels, because if we're going to create the conditions to fulfill that negotiation, We've got to keep also, we haven't mentioned this, economic pressure on the Iranians, and that has got to include Europe. We can't simply continue our sanctions, which we are doing commendably at this moment by the Biden administration, but they're loopy, they're full of holes because the Europeans are willing to trade with the Iranians. So we've got to get the Europeans on side, then we can negotiate the conditions that you and I just discussed.
Now, last week we talked about Cyber Command, and so this week it is unfortunately the case that we have evidence for why we need it. Hacker changed chemical level in Florida city water system. And I don't know if you've read this about Oldsmar.
Of course.
But, yeah, I mean, how did you react to this? Oldsmar, Florida, the lie level. Who saw that coming?
Yeah, and of course, two disclosures here. One, I'm known often online as Admiral Florida Man.
Yeah.
And I live here. I'm a native. So, yes, I follow Florida closely. And B, disclosure, serious one, I am on the board of American Water, the largest water utility in the country. So I spend a lot of time in this space and a lot of time at board meetings arguing strenuously for cyber protections in our water systems. Think about it, Hugh. We spend a lot of money protecting our electric grid and our natural gas grid, and we should. But here's a news flash. You can live a long time without electricity. You can live a long time without natural gas coming into your home. You can live about 3 days without potable water coming into your house. And we need those kind of protections. And the water industry is vulnerable, just like those other industries, with exactly what happened, chemical imbalances. That's an attempt at poisoning the water. That's extremely severe. But you can also do any number of things to potable water supplies by simply adjusting chemical contents. Won't be poisonous, but it will not be potable.
Well, I am just curious, and let's take American Water out of the equation. Generally speaking, what would you recommend a water company do after they read this story? Because if I mean, this is a little town in the middle of nowhere. Someone tries to poison it. Doesn't the flare go up over every water company in America?
It absolutely does. And here's a problem. As you may or may not know, our water supplies in America are extremely disaggregated. There are very few large equivalents of the big electric grids that provide our electricity. Most water comes from municipal small facilities that are run for historical reasons by individual towns, counties, little cities. There are very few big companies that have the cyber resources. So my advice for all of those systems is get somebody on your board, and they all have a board, a municipal board, who has some real cyber expertise. Get someone on the board who has law enforcement expertise. Go to the county, go to the state level, and get resources to have them come in and at least look at your basic cyber protections, no matter how small your water treatment plant is, because as we've just seen, it can be a target.
Yeah, now we have a warning. There's always an issue in negligence as to whether or not there was foreseeability. This is the lawyer talking. And foreseeability doesn't exist until it actually happens. But after it happens, now foreseeability is everywhere, and liability follows foreseeability, Admiral.
Sounds like a law school class to me, Hugh. I'll leave that in your capable lawyerly hands. But I will say this, as a national security practitioner, I want our water grid to be as safe as our national electric grid and our natural gas grid. And those have vulnerabilities. I think water has more vulnerability. We need to put emphasis on this one. And yes, we have, as you put it, a flare that's gone up. Let's take a look at it.
Admiral, always good to talk to you, and expertise again when I didn't expect it, but there it was. Admiral James Stavridis, United States Navy retired. Thank you, Admiral. Expertise on relief factor is with me. I take it every day. I'm the best expertise you can have is someone who takes it every day and keeps moving. Took yesterday off after 10 and 4 on the weekend, but ReliefFactor.com never gets a day off. You need to take it every day because Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, omega are the 4 natural supplements that support the temporary relief of minor aches and pains, and tens of thousands of you take it every day. Great sponsors of this show, and I encourage you, give it a try. If you've got some nagging pain, if you've got some continuing condition that just makes your commute every day or just reminds you every day that life's not grand, try ReliefFactor.com. Come right back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
This is Lon Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The Biden administration announced in their first week that the U.S. is rejoining the World Health Organization. But the WHO is a flawed group, one that has performed poorly while the world has struggled with COVID-19. Early on, the group was far too deferential to China, even parroting Beijing's early claim that the virus could not be transmitted between humans. Since then, an independent panel concluded that the WHO dithered in its response, waiting too long to declare an international emergency. All the while, the WHO has continued to block Taiwan's participation because of political objections from the Chinese government, despite the fact that the world has much to learn from Taiwan's exceptional response to the virus. Before rejoining the WHO, we should have demanded some accountability and reform from the group for the $400 million in taxpayer dollars we send to it each year. It looks like we'll keep on writing blank checks to the WHO, which they are more than happy to keep cashing. I'm Lon Chen.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, 1-800-520-1234. Coming up next hour, Senators John Cornyn, Senator Tom Cotton will both be joining me to talk about the Perry Mason impeachment. Never has there been so much ink spilled and so much time spent on a matter the complete end of which is well known. He will be acquitted because it's an unconstitutional proceeding, as impeachment and trial applies to officers in office, not former officers and private citizens. And why is this happening? Why is this happening? Because a lot of people hate Donald Trump and want vindication. They need vindication. They need some kind of closure. It's almost a psychological drama. Now, the president was reckless. On January the 6th, he was ill-advised in his arguments about the recounts. He was pursuing them in courts, and that was not turning out because there was not evidence of any of the allegations that he made, and there wasn't standing in a lot of the cases. I've never had any sympathy for these arguments. I do not believe them to be true. But the Constitution comes first, and the Constitution says the president and the vice president and all other officers shall be impeached and tried and removed from office, and barred from future office. I'm paraphrasing that. The assumption in office, Joseph Story, the greatest constitutional commentator, said, yeah, this is not for people who are out of office. The state constitutions at the time included provisions that allowed people who had formerly served to be impeached on the British model. The framers were smart. The framers were aware of it. The framers didn't discuss it. The framers did not opine on it. It's so freaking obvious that you have to be really after Trump to ignore this. I would have stood against it for Clinton, against it for Nixon, against it for anyone. It is not appropriate to depart from the Constitution because you find it convenient to persecute someone you do not like, someone you consider to be a menace, someone you consider to be a criminal. It does not matter. The Constitution doesn't amend the Constitution. If you want to impeach Trump, go off and amend the Constitution to impeach Trump. That's a bill of attainder. So go and try and pass a bill of attainder. We also we threw that out with the English precedent of post-office impeachments. We don't like bills of attainders or ex post facto laws. There are lots of things our Constitution does not like because it was a product of Enlightenment genius. And now we've got a bunch of commentators who don't like the framers today. They pretend to like them a lot other days, but they don't like them when they stand in their way. We've run into that a lot before, and it's an unfortunate development. Let me go and update you on masks. Tony Fauci on masks with Brett Barry yesterday, cut number 1.
You know, Brett, that will really be dependent upon how we get the level of virus in the community down. If we can get, and I have used this as an estimate, it's not definitive, that if we can get 70 to 85% of our population vaccinated and get to what we would hope would be to a degree of herd immunity, which really is an umbrella or a veil of protection against the community, where the level of virus is so low, it's not a threat at all, then at that point you could start thinking in terms of not having to have uniform wearing of masks. But we're certainly not near there yet. When do I think that would occur? You know, it's very difficult to predict, Brett, but if everything falls into the right place and we get this under control, it is conceivable that you might be able to pull back a bit on some of the public health measures as we get into the late fall of this year. But there's no guarantee of that, because if we don't get the overwhelming majority of the population vaccinated, there's still going to be a considerable amount of virus in the community. And as long as that's the case, Brett, people are going to have to wear masks.
I wish that someone had asked Dr. Fauci, can people who have had the vaccine transmit the vaccine? Because I believe the answer is yes. I mean, not the vaccine. Can people who've had the vaccine transmit the virus? I believe the answer is yes, which is the reason why one needs to wear a mask longer rather than less long. But I don't know that for sure. I would have liked him to have been asked that. It doesn't seem to me that the good doctor is asked the kind of specific questions. And the most important thing right now is what Israel's experiencing. Demand for vaccination is plummeting. All right. Why? Because the people who wanted it, usually older people, people who are more at risk, immediately went and got it as soon as they could. And as I will. I'm going to be 65. I want to get the vaccine. And younger people don't think they're much at risk. And they probably aren't. Truth be told, you've got to make a persuasive case to them why it's good for the community to get vaccinated. But you don't get it by assertion. You get it by persuasion. And the persuasion effort, not so good. Stay tuned. A lot of good guests coming up in hour number 3 of the Hugh Hewitt Show. As the news of the day is, the Perry Mason impeachment gets underway. I'm covering it here on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
You. Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
How can they do what they do to the Republicans, and Republicans cannot do anything to them? They have been cited many times of, I'm going to take Trump out tonight, I'm going to take him out and beat the hell out of it. Why? It doesn't make any sense.
You know,
they can prosecute them, but they can't be prosecuted. You know what I'm saying?
Of course I know what you're saying. We've been talking about it all week. You've got Chuck Schumer outside the Supreme Court, all but threatening Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. You've got Maxine Waters saying, gather around Trump cabinet members, let them know they're not welcome anywhere anymore. Yeah, we've played that whole montage of Democrats talking about fight, fight, fight. Eric Swalwell had a relationship with a Chinese spy. He hasn't lost his committee positions on the Intel Committee. Ilhan Omar hasn't lost her committee assignments. Jews have brainwashed the world. Jewish lawmakers have dual loyalties. Hasn't lost any committee assignments. Chuck Schumer's 1974 racist scheme to get rid of black people out of an area in Flatbush. What's that? You didn't know about it? I've done a video about it. Go on YouTube. I've written about it. A guy named Jay Homnick, who was there when this racist scheme was hatched has written about it. American Spectator. Article is called Race to the Top. Google it. I've interviewed him a couple times on my program. Google that. Nobody seems to care.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
And there's another headline I saw over at Politico that caught my eye. No, conservatives shouldn't quit on the GOP. There was a lot of party drama last night involving the freshman congresswoman from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Liz Cheney, the congresswoman from Wyoming. It appears the Republicans have stood by both of them. They're not stripping Marjorie Taylor Greene of being on any committees, and they're not stripping Liz Cheney of her leadership. Rich Lowry writes a pretty compelling piece, and he's not a Trump fan at all. But understand, the fortunes of our political parties, he writes, ebb and flow, and their iterations change over time, but they are robust, deeply embedded institutions of our public life that endure even after electoral disasters and self-sabotaging wrong turns. I mean, there are declarations now that the Republican Party is doomed. A former chair of the Washington State GOP wrote in an op-ed in the Seattle Times, "Let's form a new Republican Party." There's a CNN headline, "Should Republicans disband the GOP?" The former Republican Representative Mickey Edwards wrote an article after January 6th saying he's quitting the party because it has become the opposite of what it was. Rich Lowry observes, this all seems a mite premature about a party that represents, roughly half the country, and is on the cusp of a majority in the House, tied 50-50 in the Senate, and in control of the governorships in 27 states, and both the governorship and state legislature in 22 of those.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
This is now a playbook. The secret history of the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election. This is not something where they just are going to disassemble this. This is how they're going to do it from this point forward. So what are the big takeaways? Number one, the left is just now realizing how much power they really have over us. I think they're still learning how to use that power. Number two, the left is willing at almost all costs to sacrifice truth for power. Number three, persuasion means very little when the other side is actually concerned of how the election is going to be conducted. You know, we joked around throughout the the first couple weeks after early November, after the election. We said it doesn't matter how people vote; it matters who counts the votes. Remember, we joked about that. Well, they say here in Podhorser's presentations, winning the vote was only the first step to winning the election. After that came winning the count. Winning the count. Can you believe it? Not just what people think, but actually how the votes are counted. Winning the certification, winning the Electoral College, and winning the transition. This is now going to be how they will handle every single election from this point forward.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. The American experiment is founded upon a presupposition, a prior commitment to an ordered liberty, an established order. That means policies. It means a covenant. In our case, it means a constitution. As of right now, the U.S. Constitution is the longest surviving written constitution in human history. It's a remarkable document. All of that came to the fore in violent events that interrupted the joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. At the end of the day, our constitutional order proved itself once again resilient. But that doesn't take away any of the tragedy and the horror of what took place. It was an enormous stress test on ordered liberty, a stress test brought on by the President of the United States.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
It's an opportunity for the right, the left, conservatives, liberals, all Americans to repudiate political violence and reaffirm, once again, our commitment to ordered liberty. It's the American way. I'm Albert Mohler.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
I think the Lincoln Project is specifically a smear campaign to break down what we might call Trumpism, I think could be better called MAGA, Make America Great Again. If you want to, I know it's your show, so if you want to call it America First, I suppose
MAGA's
that's okay
fine.
too.
MAGA's fine.
MAGA, I think, is probably most appropriate though, which is this kind of not nationalistic but nationistic idea that people should be able to have nations that are sovereign, not subject to supranational entities. It's not like rah, 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 USA, USA, although if people want to feel that way about their country, more power to them. But that's not the point. Poland should be able to be Poland, France should be able to be France, the UK should be able to be the UK, and so on. And that it's a broader philosophy in that regard, and that we should, in fact, pursue our own national interests as each individual nation, which is really what MAGA, when applied to the MAGA, is that applied to the American context. Yeah. And so these guys are smear artists who are attempting to destroy and discredit that because they are making money and their people are making money hand over fist from the same foreign wars and the same garbage that people turn to Trump to get away from. And I say that I was horrified in 2016 by Trump. I was utterly against him. I had Trump derangement syndrome like everybody else, or half of everybody else, I guess. And now it's
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings to everyone going to work. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening. I'm joined by Congresswoman Carol Miller, who sits on the House Ways and Means Committee. She's from the 3rd District of West Virginia. She's originally a Buckeye. I do not know why she left our wonderful state well, I had to leave too, so I guess there might be a reason she went down to West Virginia. Good morning, Congresswoman. Welcome. Why did you abandon Ohio?
Well, it was this cute blonde in a uniform that went to the Citadel.
Well, you see, I married a cute brunette in California, and that's why I'm out in the California for 30 years and then back in Virginia. Congresswoman, thank you for joining me. I just added Clarksburg, big signal in Clarksburg, so I was looking over the delegation, and I see you're on Ways and Means, and so I want to ask you a question about what the Democrats are trying to do with a child tax credit. And Governor Romney, now Senator Romney, suggested something like that, but the Democratic plan is actually more sweeping. I believe it's $3,600 for children under 6, $3,000 for children between 17 and 6. Have I got that right?
Well, I assume you have it right because I don't have any of the figures in front of me, but I know it was pretty darn big.
And is it permanent? Are they proposing a 1-year tax credit, or are they proposing a permanent tax credit?
Well, that remains to be seen. You know, we still need to get all these things through the committee. My major premise on that is anytime you do anything federally, it's not temporary, even though they claim it's going to be.
Has there been any effort to reach out across the aisle in Ways and Means? The tax writing business is it's where the big stuff happens. It's where Kevin Brady is our ranking member. I mean, it's where it all goes down. Has anyone talked to you about it?
Well, we had our first meeting this past week, and it was just an organizational meeting. But tomorrow is going to be a big day working through this. And so, yes, I've had communication from my ranking member, and the discussions are just now open. So we just did $10 billion in child care. So it'll be interesting to see how the back and forth goes and what the final thing will be.
Now, the argument on the left, Congresswoman, is that the Trump tax cut was a gift to the wealthy in America that needs to be undone by another gift of money from Ways and Means and Appropriations to those who've been injured by the virus. We've done $4 trillion. The world has done $12 trillion or $10 trillion, and they're counting the $2 trillion that President Biden wants. What's your response to this?
My response is we need to get Main Street back to work. To me, that is the most important thing. When we can earn a living and we are working, we've already got money still hanging out there from the previous COVID bill that has not been spent. And I think it's more important that, yes, we get this vaccine out. By the way, West Virginia's done a terrific job. And we need to make sure our schools are in place and that people are working on Main Street, because our economy is equally important in order to hold us all up with all this money that we're trying to spend.
Now, Joe Manchin is the most important man in the Congress right now. You must know him because of West Virginia is not that big of a state and not that big of a delegation. Do you think he'll stick by his promises on the filibuster?
I think so. I did serve under him in the minority when I was in the State House, and he has to remember who he represents. And I think that he's getting the feeling from the state that he needs to be the guy that makes things more balanced in our government.
He's made as well promises about not packing the Supreme Court. He seems fairly level-headed, but I keep telling people he's a Democrat's Democrat. Am I right about that, Congresswoman?
Yes, sir.
And so they keep saying, why didn't he switch parties? And I keep saying, because he's a Democrat. And do you hold any hope that he'll switch parties at any point?
No, I don't. As I said, I have served with him. He is a Democrat, and I just don't see him changing who he is at this time in his life. And, I'd love to be mistaken.
Yeah, but I don't think you are. He's not Jim Jeffords. So, Congresswoman, the other thing I'm asking all my guests who are Congress people, redistricting is coming up. Is West Virginia keeping the same number of Congress people, or are they getting or losing a member?
We will lose a member.
And so that means redistricting is going to be a knife fight. How does it happen in your state?
Well, we don't know yet. I served on the redistricting committee in 2010.
Oh.
Most of it was done behind closed doors, and then we'd have a meeting, and they'd say, this is what we're doing. And so I'm not in a knife fight with anyone. I am representing Southern West Virginia. I truly represent what they are and what they need. And it's all about revitalizing and reinventing what we are. And so I'm all about trade. I'm all about promoting jobs, creation, and providing opportunity for people. And, people in the state know that about me, particularly in my third or my half of the state. They do understand that I am there to do a job, and that is to promote my state, promote jobs. We've had so many issues since the war on coal, and if you could have seen the thriving communities, but of course, your concept growing up in Ohio where there are big cities, when I moved to Huntington, there were about 85,000. There are now about 50,000. But to see what happened to our state, and, I remember my friends driving to Greenville to see their grandchildren because their son couldn't get a job here and crying all the way home. And guess what? They moved to Greenville, South Carolina. And so my job is to provide as much opportunity as I can, because West Virginia is a wonderful place, and we have gorgeous mountains and rivers and people that want to work hard, and it's like the Keystone Pipeline. How do you cut people off at the knees and then say, "Oops, you can't make your house payment because we're not going to do that anymore"?
I don't believe that will be forgotten come 2022, Congresswoman. I think you'll be back in the majority in 2022 because redistricting, the Republicans control the legislature in West Virginia, do they not?
Yes, they do. And,
So
I remember when we didn't.
Yeah, and so the districts ought to be drawn with an eye on what's the makeup of your delegation right now? Is it all Republican?
Yes, there are three of us, and we're all Republicans.
And you all want to go back?
At this point, that seems to be, you just never know about musical chairs in politics. But at this time, we all three respect each other. I sit with them on the House floor. We talk about things. We don't always vote identically. It's kind of interesting. But I'm looking forward to whatever comes in the future.
You are on Ways and Means, though. And I point out to people there are three big committees. Finance, Approps, and Ways and Means. And so you're on Ways and Means. I hope that you can get the attention of your friends across the aisle on that committee because, boy, oh boy, they don't need to do any rollbacks of that which created growth up until the arrival of the virus. And there was growth.
There was
until the arrival of the virus.
Yeah. Terrific growth. And I look forward to meeting them. It's the important thing. I have served in the minority before. I did for 8 years in the State House. And what you do is you meet people, you form relationships, you find what you have in common, and you work from that premise. And so, I look forward to finding those things that we realize make America tick. And, as you say, our economy was just leaping forward. We were in a great position before this virus happened.
So, Congresswoman, last question. Why did West Virginia get it right on the rollout of the vaccine? What did they do that the other states have, like I'm in California today, it's not going to be the poster child for vaccine distribution ever?
We had a wonderful kind of triumvirate of we had General Hoyer working, the governor worked, we had our health departments, all of them. We had Dr. Clay Marsh. It was funny because it's not funny, but just interesting when this first started and our office kept reaching out. Can we help you with so-and-so? Nope, got that covered. Can we help you do this? Got that covered. You all know about Battelle in Columbus? Got that covered. They were proactive. They worked hard. That is part of the benefit of being a smaller state is we all know each other, and they pushed all the right buttons. I read in the paper this morning that they're going to be working with Walgreens to get the next tranche out. But it's working. And,
well, I hope that spreads to all the other states from the Mountaineer State. Congresswoman Carol Miller, Ways and Means on West Virginia. Thank you from West Virginia's 3rd Congressional District. I'll be right back, America. Don't go anywhere. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Don't forget to sign up for the Hugh-verse. All of Hugh's broadcasts on demand, the after show, which in my opinion is worth the price all by itself, Dwayne FM, and all sorts of bonus content. www.hughiverse.com.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
I didn't know when he was playing for the Mets that Gary Carter was a Christian. And I always feel like the media is so secular that they don't know. They just kind of shy away from this.
And Gary Carter was a phenomenal person. We admired him, but we didn't understand him because his ability to play baseball was great. But also at the same time, he was so happy. His joy was so real. And we all wanted that, but everybody thought he was, they thought he was fake, but he wasn't fake. Gary Carter was a Christian from the age of 20 all the way into his whole entire career and his life being out of the big league. So he lived a completely different life. Yeah, he was very successful, Hall of Fame, but at the same time, he lived a life for the Lord, and he was a prime example. Him and Mookie Wilson, two guys on our team that were prime example of what a godly man looked like, what a man looks like without a uniform on. And I think that represents more than anything than having a uniform on and maybe struggling and going through some hard times, from a professional standpoint. But from a spiritual standpoint, they didn't have to go through that process in their life when they were playing. And I wish I could have experienced that. I had to experience so many downfalls and pitfalls, through my career. And I was multi-talented. I could play, but I couldn't live. But today, I look at God and I thank God for his grace, the grace that I didn't deserve. That's 2 Corinthians 12:19. He says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. And in my weakness, his grace was sufficient for me, and it allowed me to be the man I am today in Christ.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
The left always does this. Always. This is part of their textbook policy. They make rules that ruin things, and then they pass laws to deal with the ruination that they brought about. It is classic. You know why the Republicans oppose this 1.8 or so trillion? The primary reason is it's going to state governments. They're bailing out the Democrats who ran profoundly irresponsible operations in spending money that they didn't have. So there's no consequence. That's the key. There's no consequence to Democratic malfeasance. There you go. We'll bail you out. We'll print more monopoly money. Wow. It's really something. The whole thing is really something, the time that we are in now. Right. Let's go to Cynthia in Palos Park, Illinois. Hello.
Hi, Dennis. How are you this morning?
I'm well, thank you.
I'm calling because I wanted to tell you that my friend Karen, my best friend, and I are planning on going with you on the Stand with Israel tour. And my reason for going is I'm feeling very, very unsettled in my life right now with what's going on to my beloved country. And I want to go to Israel to find some peace and some wisdom. And I'm wondering how many others that listen to your show are feeling the way I'm feeling, this loss of optimism with.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Lon Heechen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The Biden administration announced in their first week that the U.S. is rejoining the World Health Organization. But the WHO is a flawed group, one that has performed poorly while the world has struggled with COVID-19. Early on, the group was far too deferential to China, even parroting Beijing's early claim that the virus could not be transmitted between humans. Since then, an independent panel concluded that the WHO dithered in its response, waiting too long to declare an international emergency. All the while, the WHO has continued to block Taiwan's participation because of
22 minutes after the hour, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thanks for listening this morning. Let's check the market, brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. Andrew Del Rey, Todd Avakian, they lend you money. They are actually lenders. Sierra Pacific Mortgage is a lender, not a halfway house for referrals, not a counseling company. Nope, they want to make loans. And they'll loan you money to refinance your house. They'll loan you money to buy a house, buy a second house, buy an investment property. They will help you become a non-occupying co-borrower. That translates into you'll sign on the dotted line for your son or daughter, grandson or granddaughter to let them get into a house or a condo or a townhouse at these incredibly low interest rates. And the interest rate this morning is at 1.16% for the 10-year Treasury. That's not the interest rate that you would get on a loan. Interest rates on loans are between 2 and 3 right now. And it depends on your credit. It depends on whether or not you become a non-occupying co-borrower. And it depends on how much equity you have in your house. And it depends on a lot of different things. But you can depend on AndrewandTodd.com. And you can call them at 888-888-1172. Yesterday, the Dow was up 237 points. Yeah, I got a question for people real quick. But I've got guests the rest of the hour. 1-800-520-1234. Are any of you people Bitcoin buyers? I'm about to talk about Bitcoin. So if you are a Bitcoin buyer, 1-800-520-1234, because I think you're nuts. But the Dow is up 237 points yesterday. The NASDAQ was up 131 points, and S&P was up 28 points. Now, Bitcoin soared to an all-time new high of $44,868.98 a coin. Now, that's because Elon Musk, Tesla, bought $1.5 billion. Now, why the electronic car maker decided they needed to bank $1.5 billion of Bitcoin strikes me as just really odd and a publicity stunt. And I understand cryptocurrency about as well as the next guy, which is not well. I don't do finance. I don't do, I do very vanilla stuff, and I got a great advisor, and it's mutual funds and Amazon for me. I'm just not a very adventurous person. I do not see the upside of investing heavily in a get-rich-quick scheme, which is what Bitcoin is. It began that way. It is now traded speculatively by youngsters. And the Robin Hood gang, I think it's great to learn how to trade, but I tell my kids, don't do dumb things. Just do smart things. Mike in Atlanta, you buy Bitcoin?
I do buy Bitcoin, but only because PayPal has started offering it. You can buy it in increments. And like everything else, I'm not sure whether it's going to work or not, but I'm doing a dollar cost averaging and just putting in $150 a month. I buy a piece of it. PayPal stores it. It's easy, and they've only been out with it for a few months, so I've only been buying it for a few months.
So tell me about yourself. Are you an investor? Are you having fun in an investment club, or is this your living?
I am a 64-year-old financial planner.
Oh, so you listen to me talk about diversification, dollar cost average incoming. You think I'm as vanilla person, right? I'm as vanilla as you get.
And I've even refinanced with your boys out at Sierra, so it's great. But I'm taking a long-term view, not a short-term view on this thing. Bitcoin's not going away. I don't know where it's going, but it's not going away.
So if you lost all the money, would it hurt you?
No.
Okay, so that's the most important thing you told me. If people want to play with it, it could be the greatest thing since, Wonder Bread. But I am not for that kind of, as opposed to, for example, Tesla or Amazon or FANG or an ETF that was all high rollers. Why would you put the 150 into Bitcoin and not them, Mike?
Because Bitcoin's new. I do have Amazon. I missed the ride with Tesla. But Bitcoin to me, once it gets rid of its volatility, it could be a hedge against inflation.
All right. Well, that's why I ask people to buy gold, a little bit of gold. Mike, thank you. I appreciate it. A level-headed Bitcoin buyer. I found the one in America, and they're listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
You notice the figure 1.9 trillion just kind of rolls off the tongue. Now keep in mind, this is the administration that said they wanted to unify the country. There had to be healing. There's going to be bipartisanship. And it was all horseback. And did the same thing that the Obama administration did. The Obama administration came in. Remember all their health care plans? And the Republicans, Ryan wanted to meet him halfway and had all sorts of ideas. And Obama says, dude, we won the election, you lost. So we ran on Obamacare, and we're going to do Obamacare. So just sit down and watch how we work. Same thing here. Not a single Republican buying in a $1.9 trillion. $1.9 trillion used to sound like a lot of money. But you know who said something about it being excessive and likely to ignite inflation like we've never seen before? Larry Summers. You remember Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary under President, let me think, I can't remember. I remember now, Barack Obama. Op-ed piece. Could ignite inflationary pressures, quote, of a kind we have not seen in a generation, end of quote. See, young people don't remember inflation. 13.5% during the recession that Ronald Reagan dealt with, 13.5%. Prices increasing 13.5% every year. You guys don't know from that. Again, this is Larry Summers. This is the Treasury Secretary under Obama.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
We've got to open up our schools. We've got to let our kids get an education again. Lori Lightfoot, furious, it seems, with the Chicago Teachers Union. So listen to Trey Gowdy's monologue last night on Fox News, recounting a story and tying it together with his wife, who apparently is an educator, and what's happening in cities like Chicago right now.
I want you to keep this dichotomy in your mind. The image of a young boy walking to school for hours, getting in the car with a stranger because he understood the power of education to change his life. And now contrast that with the image of those dancing teachers in Chicago. That child knew the power of education and being in school. I wish the teachers in Chicago knew as much as he did.
That's powerful. And he's right. He's right. 800-655-Mike. Let's get your reaction. Here's the Chicago Mayor, Lori Lightfoot, begging the Chicago teachers, please go back to work.
And as the expression goes, the proof is in the pudding. CPS had 3 weeks of successful implementation of these mitigation plans in our schools. That was until the CTU blew up that success and created chaos that we are now enduring. And also remember, the CPS staff and principals have been in our schools throughout this pandemic, feeding our kids, getting them ready for the return of students, and continuing the hard work every single day. And
what are the Chicago teachers doing?
There are teachers.
They're making dancing videos. They're by themselves on Zoom dancing and...
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
Seemingly misrepresenting where she was and what she was doing during the Capitol tragedy. For what reason, I'm not exactly sure.
I don't know, so deeply rattled. I'm still processing the end of my life when I come out. And I come out, and this man is a Capitol Police officer. There was no partner, was not yelling, Capitol Police, etc., etc. But then it didn't feel right. Because he was looking at me with a tremendous amount of anger and hostility.
So this was a Capitol Police officer that was trying to help her. And she immediately said that he was looking at me with a lot of anger and hostility. Let's go to cut 36, where the story gets even more complicated. Cut 36.
I talked to G, my legislative director, after the fact, and he said, no.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by United States Senator John Cornyn of Texas. Good morning, Senator. How are you?
Morning, Hugh. Doing well, thanks.
I am carrying on in the middle of a radio show, an online discussion with Professor Brian Kalt and others about the appropriateness of an impeachment trial of a private citizen. I will not be persuaded where Justice Story wasn't persuaded and where the framers weren't persuaded that they really meant this and they just left it out. I mean, has anyone come up and approached you with an argument yet that is even remotely plausible other than political?
Well, that's a new way to interpret the Constitution. It's what they left out, not what they put in. But no, I mean, this is a made-up process. It's if this were the impeachment of a president, as you know, it required the Chief Justice to preside. And now we've got Senator Leahy, who will be the presiding officer. Presumably, he'll still act as a juror. Debbie Stabenow, the senator from Michigan, said, "Well, we're all victims," and then I assume we're all witnesses too. This is Anglo-American jurisprudence turned on its head.
Well, I have played your quote today because I think it's important that condemnation of a pseudo-constitutional process not be confused with applause for what happened on January 6th. I believe the president was reckless that day. You said it, I said it in real time, that it was reckless and that he ought to step forward and call these 800 people who invaded the Congress off. But that doesn't change the Constitution. And do your colleagues across the aisle acknowledge this at all?
No, this is a political process. And, Hamilton said as much in Federalist 65, as much as we try to analogize this to a legal proceeding in a court of law. It's unique, but it's clear that this is part of a continuum. A lot of the same impeachment managers served on the Judiciary Committee that tried President Trump a year ago. And so this has just been a continuum ever since he was sworn into office. But again, I agree with you. You need to distinguish between making a serious mistake and going down there and giving a speech and encouraging the mob. But that's the problem with mobs is that the lowest common denominator prevails. And here there were people who committed acts of violence, including in one case murder of a police officer. And we can't excuse that.
Now, in some cases, I believe the Democrats are looking for leverage in an attempt to tarnish the Republican brand for a very long time. Sure. In other cases, I think some people want vindication for having been anti-Trump before he was nominated, after he was nominated, before he was elected, during the transition, and every day of his presidency. They need vindication, and they need exoneration for what they did. And in other cases, and I want to ask you about this, misconduct related to President Trump remains out there. U.S. Attorney Durham, now Special Counsel Durham, is still at work. Do you think any of this has to do with changing the framing of what went on during the Trump presidency, not the post-presidency?
I do. I think anybody and everybody who supported President Trump's policies is being criticized as an enabler of the president. They're trying to analogize support for his policies with support for some of the self-destructive personality traits of the president. So, yeah, it's amazing to me that Joe Biden would squander his first 100 days of his administration with both trying to do reconciliation on a party line vote and then go back and try somebody who's no longer even president.
Well, they're going to get 5 votes, maybe part of those 5 will vote to acquit, even though after the evidence on due process grounds, we'll see. But it's a Perry Mason impeachment because we know the end of it. And now I'd like to go to, if I can, to the reconciliation, because that's going to go on and on and on. Does Joe Manchin intend to hold the line on silly stuff, in your opinion?
Well, the problem is that, everybody likes Joe, but Joe will vote with you when you don't need the vote. When you really, really need the vote, that's the question here, and he's got to hold the line on blowing up the Senate by eliminating the filibuster. And as you know, the arcane rules of budget reconciliation don't allow extraneous substantive legislation on a budget bill. That's the so-called Byrd rule, as you know. So we'll see whether he holds the line or not. He's going to be under tremendous pressure. I think he's enjoying the attention, but it's not all going to be fun.
Well, I don't believe he's going to break a explicit promise on the filibuster, but the Byrd rule is rather accordion-like, isn't it? Or maybe it hasn't been, and the Democrats hope to make it an accordion. What is your sense on that, whether or not he or Senator Sinema or somebody else, maybe Angus King, recognizes that you don't want to gut the Byrd rule?
Well, that's a backdoor elimination of the filibuster. So it's not coming in the front door, it's the back door, because that's where you pass your agenda on the budget by eliminating this the Byrd rule that prohibits that by using a nuclear option. And forgive me for all the jargon, but you understand what I'm saying is that this is just another way to eliminate the filibuster and turn the Senate into a body that, just like the House, that can pass legislation with 51 votes, not the deliberative body that the founders intended, and that where we are required to gain consensus before we actually do something legislatively that will affect the lives of 330 million people.
Well, you see, I'm one of those people that attributes to the Democrats a little bit of strategery, and that they might be doing the impeachment trial in order to put out a lot of flack to obscure the Byrd rule discussion, because the Byrd rule does confuse a lot of people, and it is very important to get right. How soon after the circus will the real business get before you? The real business being the reconciliation bill.
Well, now that the budget resolution is passed, there are instructions that go to the various committees that now have to pass legislation to comply with those out of the committee, and then they'll be sent to the budget committee, put together, and then they'll come back to the floor. That's when we'll be really actually legislating, because the budget resolution isn't signed by the president. It's not law. And so that'll probably be March, be my guess. But it's amazing to me that Joe Biden gave a really nice speech on January the 20th, talking about healing the nation and unity, and appears to be doing none of that during his early time in office.
Well, there needs to be a ground on which the GOP stands. I read a piece in the Washington Post about this. They have to start making substantive arguments. What do you think is the biggest flaw in the $1.9 trillion proposal, Senator?
Well, it's just not necessary. Only about 20% of the money that we appropriated in December has even been spent, Hugh. And you can't tell me that a $15 minimum wage is part of a COVID-19 relief package. And it's not as if the economy really needs more stimulus, because we're growing at a rate of about 4% a year, pretty good clip. In other words, what we've done before has helped, and the American economy, as resilient as it is coming back. But we do need targeted relief. We need to deploy the vaccine to make sure we get as many shots in arms as we possibly can. And we need to get kids safely back to school. And, of course, we're all watching the battle between the teachers' unions and parents about what's happening to our children, which is really tragic.
Now, there is also the problem that of the, I believe, total $5 trillion at the end of the Biden rescue package, it might be more. None of that money will have gone to defense, Senator Cornyn. So we will have done the most incredible thing ever. We will have increased the debt to $28 or $29 trillion, and we will not have bought a bullet. Am I right about that?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. This is nothing to do with national security or defense, and it's all about domestic spending and spending money we don't have, as you point out.
Well, I'm just astonished that is happening, that no one is standing up and saying we're spending $5 trillion. It's trillions for relief and not a penny for defense. It's like the reverse of what's ever happened before. Now, in Texas, I am curious, because I have Governor Abbott on later this week. In Texas, is the president's early approval waning, or is it growing stronger as he pursues his course of pure partisanship?
Well, I think, of course, President Biden didn't carry the day in Texas on November the 3rd. I think people want to give him the benefit of the doubt in his early days. But again, this contrast between what he says and what he actually does, I think, is beginning to sink in. And, of course, Texas has been the beacon of jobs and prosperity for the country. We've been taking a big hit, particularly in the oil and gas sector, which this administration wants to eliminate, along with the jobs that are created at a time when we really don't have the alternative energy sources that we hope to someday. In the meantime, thousands of people out of work, Keystone XL pipeline quashed, and that's just the beginning.
All right, last question, Senator. I'm going to go to this with Tom Cotton as well, coming up after you. If this is very in the weeds, if you have an objection or a question, does Senator Leahy get the advantage of having staff advise him on the law when you make that to him as the presiding officer?
Well, you raise a good question. You recall that Chief Justice Roberts refused to ask a question that was tendered to him, I believe, by Senator Paul. And I don't know whether Senator Leahy is going to exercise the same sort of discretion over and censor what senators can ask in terms of questions. I do believe he'll consult with a parliamentarian who will advise him, but he's not obligated to follow the parliamentarian's advice. And that demonstrates to me a conflict of interest. You can't be a juror and a judge at the same time.
No, you can't. I'm just imagining, though, the Chief Justice is kind of in command of the law when he sits down, and I'm sure he studied. I've known him for a long time. I'm sure he studies up. Sure. Senator Leahy's been there a long time. I'm not sure he's up to date on these arcane arguments of constitutional law. Is someone acting as his clerk?
Not to my knowledge. I believe he'll just rely on the parliamentarian. So, this is, as much as we would like to think about this as being a legal proceeding, and that's the best analogy we can come up with, this is a political exercise from start to finish, and I don't expect Senator Leahy or any of the Senate Democrats to take leave their politics at the door. I think that's what's driving this.
That which gets rewarded gets repeated. I just think this is such a bad precedent, Senator, and I wish you well in persuading some of your colleagues. This is a terrible, terrible precedent to lay down. Thank you, Senator. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
I cannot believe they're doing this. It is such a terrible precedent. The politics of vengeance. Vengeance is my, saith the board. Democrats are bored. They can only spend money one time. They get one time. They're going to be able to pass one thing in this Congress. That is the reconciliation. And that's already done. They've already decided to spend $2 trillion, and they're bored. So they're spending a week on this. Unbelievable. ReliefFactor.com is not unbelievable. ReliefFactor.com actually works. Sponsor of the program. There's the bag. Every day at this time, I remind you, I should remind the people on the Washington Post. I'm doing the Washington Post right after this, their first look show. And Don Edwards and Jonathan Capehart, maybe I'll give them some ReliefFactor.com because their backs always hurt when I'm done with them. I break their backs on every show when we do that. And I want you, if you've got a bad back, bad knees, bad ankles, bad anything that you complain about, and you complain about a lot, try ReliefFactor.com. $19.95 gets you a starter pack, 3 weeks, $19.95. Give it a whirl. See if it works for you. It certainly works for me. And then come right back. Senator Tom Cotton is next on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. The American experiment is founded upon a presupposition, a prior commitment to an ordered liberty, an established order. That means policies. It means a covenant. In our case, it means a constitution. As of right now, the U.S. Constitution is the longest surviving written constitution in human history. It's a remarkable document. All of that came to the fore in violent events that interrupted the joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. At the end of the day, our constitutional order proved itself once again resilient. But that doesn't take away any of the tragedy and the horror of what took place. It was an enormous stress test on ordered liberty, a stress test brought on by the President of the United States.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
It's an opportunity for the right, the left, conservatives, liberals, all Americans to repudiate political violence and reaffirm, once again, our commitment to ordered liberty. It's the American way. I'm Albert Mohler.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
What else should people who are just waking up to the threat of whatever you want to call it, wokeism, critical theory, what else should they read? And then on top of that, James, if you really want to do something about it beyond, I don't know how we're going to begin to break up the mafia that is the schools of education, what can general listeners and viewers do, in your opinion?
Okay, so I mean, I don't mean to shill for myself. It's not usually my style, but I created the website New Discourses to try to make something that people can read. It's not to say that there's nothing out there. There are other books. Mike Gonzalez's book, The Plot to Change America, is not bad. I've read that. Rod Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies, I think is important, especially to the second part of your question, where I'm going to mention Solzhenitsyn here in a second, as it is, for what the average person can do. But I do encourage people to go read New Discourses. I think I've published close to 500,000 words in the last year, most of which I wrote myself, to try to get information out about this. So you can see, I know it's a little bit heady, it's a little bit scholarly. You're right about Breitbart. Breitbart read these guys and is extremely good at breaking it down in a way that's more digestible than I'm a little scholarly past that. You may want to read... is it Martin Gurri? Gurri is certainly the last name, Gurri, Revolt of the Public, for example, to see the role that the internet plays, these social networks play in what's happening now. It's a different kind of attack. It's not going to explain to you the nature of this side of the problem. It's going to explain to you the nature of the information world that we're trapped in. I do encourage everybody, though, to go read some Herbert Marcuse, especially Repressive Tolerance, for themselves directly.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Senator Tom Cotton. Senator Cotton, remind me, who taught you at Harvard Law, Con Law?
Dick Fallon.
Did you spend a lot of time on post-tenure impeachment trials?
No, Hugh. We either didn't spend it or I fell asleep or missed that day of class, to which I've had to plead guilty on several topics as well.
Well,
my liberal critics might say I slept through all of law school.
Well, I'm just wondering, because in 25 years of teaching, I know that there is an article by Brian Kalt, a fine professor at Michigan State Law School. I have just never come across the argument that you could have an impeachment for a former official because it's such a terrible idea. What do you think going in? Has anything changed your mind? I know you voted against it to begin with. Has anything changed your mind?
No, Hugh, from the day the House passed this rushed article of impeachment, I had said it was beyond the constitutional authority of the Senate to have an impeachment proceeding to convict and remove a man from office who left office 3 weeks ago. By the time we're done with this, probably almost a month ago. And I think it just doesn't make much sense to many Americans. I understand there are very smart lawyers who have argued both sides of this question. And I've got friends that I respect on both sides of the question. To me, it's a pretty clear question. But the fact that you've got smart lawyers, many of both conservatives on both sides arguing both sides of the question, just goes to show, as many things are in constitutional law, you can argue that it's a close question, but should we really be having an impeachment proceeding against a former president on the grounds of a close constitutional question if you believe it is close? Or should we be focused on the people's business and what's ahead of us and trying to get past this pandemic and get the economy back on its feet? I would argue most Americans think it's pretty strange what they're seeing in Washington this week, and that they want us to focus on their business.
That's the prudential argument. I don't think this is a closed question. I read Professor McConnell's, for whom I use his casebook in my First Amendment class. I use Erwin Chemerinsky's in my con law class. They're great people, wise people. It just isn't close, and Justice Story didn't think it was close either. My question to you is a procedural one. If you want to make an objection in the course of this process, and Senator Leahy is presiding, as I understand he will be, does he answer that out of the font of knowledge he has accumulated in his many, many decades in the Senate, or does he have someone who actually knows something about constitutional law at his right hand?
So, Hugh, the typical way that happens, whether it's Senator Leahy or for that matter, the Chief Justice last year, or just in the ordinary course of Senate business, is that we rely first and foremost on the expert advice of the parliamentarian's office. You see them sitting in front of the presiding officer, sometimes whispering in the presiding officer's ear. And those questions have typically been evaluated in advance. You know, the lawyers on both sides of this question have briefed it up. So it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be a surprise what they argue today on the constitutional question. And we rely first and foremost on the parliamentarians.
But Senator Paul tried to ask a question. The Chief Justice refused to do it in Trump impeachment 1.0. If he tries to do so again in Trump impeachment 2.0 or anybody else, that's not going to be something that the parliamentarian will ever have encountered before. So it will be up to the presiding officer to decide. And I mean, does he get?
Hugh, that's a good question. I don't recall what that question was in the first one. I know on this one, the threshold question is what we considered in a way 2 weeks ago, whether or not we have the constitutional authority to conduct this trial. And the trial procedure resolution yesterday allows for several hours of argument today and then a vote. So we've already kind of laid the table for that vote. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily going to reflect exactly what the vote was 2 weeks ago. Technically, Hugh, the vote 2 weeks ago was a vote to table the motion to dismiss. So one might have voted against that on the grounds that it was appropriate to hear the argument and make a decision. Now, I wouldn't expect any of the 45 of us who voted not to table it. So we wanted to move straight to a vote on the motion to dismiss to change our position. But you might have several Republicans, and for that matter, Democrats, who, after hearing the arguments, are prepared to decide that motion on its merits.
Well, we could only hope. That would at least get us out of this very quickly, Senator. On the Byrd rule, have you talked to Joe Manchin? Is he going to be strong on the Byrd rule?
I talk to Joe almost every day, Hugh. And Joe has said that he sits in the seat held by Robert Byrd. And the Byrd rule is designed to ensure that our special budget rules only apply to budgetary measures, taxes and spending, not to purely policy measures like, say, D.C. statehood or immigration or minimum wage. Those are the measures that are subject to the legislative filibuster and for which the Senate needs to find consensus and a bipartisan path ahead. So,
and
I take Joe at his word.
I saw you have followed whether or not people not in the country legally are going to be getting benefits from this. Has he weighed in on that yet?
So Joe was one of the 8 Democrats who voted last week not to give stimulus checks to illegal aliens, which I think is a pretty common sense position. It's amazing to me that 42 Senate Democrats want to give your tax dollars to illegal aliens in the form of stimulus checks. But there are 8 Democrats who broke ranks.
Well, it's going to be a wild couple of weeks. Senator Cotton, we'll keep talking to you. Bring along a pen to stab your leg with, because it's going to get pretty dull pretty quick, I think. Thank you, Senator Cotton. Hey, America, go over to the Washington Post First Look. I'm joining Jonathan Capehart and Don Edwards there as soon as this show concludes. Thank you, Adam and Dwayne. Thank you, Ben and Harley. I'll be back tomorrow on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.